PM Weekly starting right now, bringing emergency managers from around the world together to learn, share and collaborate.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are at in this fine nation and the world. Hey, you know what? It is New Year's week, I guess. Like tomorrow's New Year's Eve, my sister's birthday. Happy birthday, Debbie. And also, it's the end of the year kind of review. But Dan is on vacation. Can you believe it or not? He's out there. I'm sure he's listening right now, motoring on his way back from the Midwest to come back to California. But so, Dan, we have John Scardina from Disaster Tough. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on here. I think I've switching spots with Dan because he's leaving the Midwest. I just moved to the Midwest, so we're living the dream here out here in the Midwest. So
absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's cold there, so it's. I would say it's normally nice here, but it's pouring rain out. It's been pouring rain for the last few days. Hopefully that the hillsides in here where the burn scars are around here are staying in put. I have not heard of too much damage happening right now. But other than that, it's been a wet, cold Christmas. How about for you?
Yeah, so you're talking about being cold. I actually appreciate the cold because December has been crazy in the Midwest. Anytime it got warm, we started getting tornado sirens. So I'll take the 37 to 45 degree weather with no tornadoes for a while.
So a couple things we're gonna do today. One is we talked about we're gonna just kind of recap the year and just how things are going, and then I want to put our Nostradamus cap on and see if we can predict the future, what's going to happen for 2022. But let's start with the recap. So, man, 2021, we thought we're going to be out of COVID. That didn't happen. Matter of fact, we started making up. I say making up. That's makes it sound like it's fake. We started having additional variants that started coming in. So we're at the Omicron variant now. What do you think? I think that we should really start looking at the concept that COVID is going to be endemic. It's no longer something we're going to have to live with for the rest of our lives. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. If we start looking at this logically and start pulling away from the emotion of I just want it to end, I think the reality is so one of the key indicators of major disaster response is sheltering operations. If nobody is in the shelter and or wants to be in the shelter, that's an indicator that you're moving into a recovery mode or a quote unquote a new normal, which is kind of an annoying phrase. But if people don't want to do the sheltering operation, which is the vaccination, that kind of stuff, then and it's available to them, then are we truly in a response? I don't know. I tend to think that this is just how it is now, and there are mitigation techniques if you want to mitigate that. But it is the question now for me is, unfortunately, like the flu, even though it's not the flu, is what's the acceptable rate of death, where we say, okay, this is not abnormal. In the UK, it's 20,000 deaths. I think I heard, for what they consider a normal for the flu. If the death rate is under 20,000, for example, do we say this is normal versus an abnormal event? I don't know.
Yeah, and it seems like, if you think about the flu A, for instance, the one that most people are getting the shots for, that is the strain that happened in 1918, right? Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like that flu from 1918 just went away. We just learned how to live with it and go through vaccinations and through, our yearly, in November or whatever, getting our vaccination. And I know that's probably for some people that's a bad word, but it is what it is, and it's a good way to deal with these issues.
If they have a better idea, like a truly better idea that's not based off of opinion, I'm happy to hear it. But vaccinations do work. I mean, we have a history of vaccinations eradicating problems. When was the last time you got polio? Right? So
no, absolutely. I mean, smallpox, for instance, is no longer an issue. Excuse me. But yeah, I mean, and I think that's the other thing too is that I don't know how to do this, and to everybody who's listening, I'm sure you guys are in the same boat that we are, but I don't know how to depoliticize this, because I think it just seems to be this political football that both parties have picked up on and are using as a and I hate it. That's why I don't like politics. And funny for a guy who studied politics, the idea of it is, we're using these things as a political football. Both sides are being very terrible at it, and I think it's how do we move it out from because flu isn't political, right? Like everybody goes, oh, go get your. No one freaking gets all upset about the flu, but you talk about COVID, and it's you think you're trying to end the world or something. How do we move it out of political? How do we move it out of politics? Can we move it out of politics?
Yeah, good questions. First of all, major shout out to you for the NDEM conference of hosting Pete Gaynor and Craig Fugate. And the reason why I call that out is because I liked Pete's answer when talking about politics. And he said, politics is built into emergency management. I think we had to learn to influence politicians a bit more because they've definitely gone off the rails. And every time they go off the rails, there's an issue. But like to your question, this is a tough one because I don't think you're gonna depoliticize it. But even with the flu, I was thinking what the cultural norms were before. If I said I had the flu, I might get answers like, "Oh, tough it out," or "come into work," or "How sick are you?" And so, like, I think even with the flu, there was both sides of it, like stay home no matter what, don't come in. If you're coughing, don't come in. I heard those answers before, and the other answers were, but how sick are you? Like you can come in, right? And so I think you're still getting both sides of that, of like, oh, how dangerous is this? And essentially messaging needs to improve dramatically, and or the normalization of it, unfortunately, just is something we're living with.
I think that's it. I think it's the messaging, right? And we go back to the beginning, mask, no mask. What I mean by mask, no mask is that, you had the government saying, oh, don't wear masks. You don't need to wear them. And then they turn around and said, you have to wear them, which really confused people. And that's what caused some controversy there. And, those other issues that are going on. But, you're right. What I mean by moving politics out of it, not the response side of it, but can we move politics out of it in the sense of like having it on the media all the time? And shit, we're here to the language. Brian, you gotta mark that box now, explicit. We're here talking about it, and so I guess we're part of the problem.
Yeah, you know what though? I think it is okay to talk about if you're talking about solutions, and I think that's our job, is to talk about solutions even when it's uncomfortable. What I'm not a fan of is creating chaos when there's no need to create chaos, and you create chaos by conflicting messaging. One big thing that I always make sure I wrangled in like the big disasters were, where are we getting our data from? And I was okay going to Congress, or my team lead going to Congress and saying everyone was using the same information from NOAA about where it was going to flood, or we were all using the same model. What was not okay is if we had one branch using one model, another branch using another model. And so like even just like getting everybody, all the official sources are using the same information, wear a mask versus don't wear a mask, creating less opportunities for confusion. I think that's huge. But in terms of not talking about it, man, there's a fine line, because like anytime there's an active shooter, like obviously the media is just the worst, right? But you need to know about it. So how do you, this would be my question to you, right? Like, how do you talk about something without creating more drama than what's needed?
That's, you're absolutely right. Because one of the problems that we have with media today, right, and mainstream media, is
for both media.
I guess is they need to make a story, right, or whatever's going on, and so they're going to look for that angle. They're going to try to find that story because they want to be different. And then what I think is interesting too is, especially here, like in Southern California, right, we have one of our sports that we have is high-speed chases, and so there's it's kind of fun to watch, helicopters chasing, everybody's chasing, and then there's always like people just on there just pontificating. I have no clue what's going on, but they have to fill that dead air. And it happens with active shooter. It happens. I think that's what's going on with this. Michael comes up and says, in 2022, FEMA and DHS will slowly reduce COVID funding with a virus that will be considered annual, like flu and West Nile virus. That's a good point, Michael.
Yeah, I know the DoD is working on this is the thing about the vaccines and science that people like sometimes forget is like the idea that it's supposed to be continual improvement. And I know the DoD is working on a vaccine that is much better, but it'll take 3 or 4 years to come out. So maybe we do get to the point where we all just get a one shot. But for now, the best solution is probably an annual booster or an annual shot. And I think that's okay to say. I think it's okay to say this is the best solution right now. And for whatever reason, I think in media, especially politicians, it's like the year of politicians really screwing things up. But yeah. So like if you think about that though, like I wish people were a little bit more brave to say this is the best idea we have right now. We hope it's not the best idea we have in the future. And like that message is lost sometimes.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is with this as well, and again, both sides of the aisle, is that the one side doesn't trust the other side at all. And what I mean by this is the typical American out there. And I mean, look at the polls after polls after polls. And then the other side of it too is that is there true leadership? And that's another what does leadership look like, and are we seeing it? And that's another debatable position there as well. Ray says a good recent example of the so-called TikTok challenge for supposed school violence on a certain day. Oh wow! And it was virtually a complete media created threat that caused some schools to cancel classes. Yeah, I mean you're right. I mean we tend to pump up hysteria based upon just for news ratings and stuff like this.
Yeah, pump up is an active shoot. Pump the brakes.
Oh,
Pump the brakes. Yeah. No, that's true. That's happened several times. To Ray's call or Raymond's call. Yeah, that's like the kid who calls into a news station saying there's going to be an active shooter on days of testing, and trying to validate credible threat. Here's a leadership question about the active shooter that happened here in the Midwest, where the parents were called. They thought there might be a threat. They sat in the principal's office, and where was the leadership of both parental side and the principal side of saying, hey, you know what? Like, I know it's hindsight is 2020 for sure, but how do you discern issues? And my question of like, what are the attributes of leadership that allow people to be brave enough to make the hard call? Like, hey, your kid really is suspended, or maybe we should check that backpack, versus everyone just want to get along, versus I respect the parents' call. Like, hey, the parent says their kid is not a bad kid or whatever. How do you create those characteristics? And pandemic life is forcing people to make calls, and I hope that they like have a good after action of, hey, was that a good call or not, or how was I making that call? Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. Hopefully a lot of new leaders come out of this.
So 2021 we had Wildland Fires. That seems to be the typical thing going on there, but it seems like they're burning hotter, faster, stronger. Is this something that we're gonna have to be dealing with going into the future, specifically with the climate issues that we have and the drier weather?
Well, yes, I think that's pretty straightforward. I mean, I responded to the most catastrophic wildfire in California history in 2017 or 2017. I responded to the worst one in 2018. In 2019, right as I was leaving the team, Paradise happened, which is the most catastrophic. And then the following year is the most catastrophic. Like every year is breaking the record, and it's happening that with hurricanes too. Like literally just keep breaking the record annually. And that is not just bizarre, but dangerous.
Right.
So, I mean, you call it what you will, whether it's, again, topics that get politicized really fast. If you're breaking the record for how people get impacted, how do you reduce the level of impact so it doesn't keep breaking the record?
Well, two things on that. Well, one is the EM Sparks webinar series this year. We're going to be discussing climate change specifically, and we have some great speakers lined up for that, and more to come on that. As I tell my students all the time, look, I don't care where you stand on the political spectrum. Talking about politics, how do we have a politics show today? On the political spectrum of whether climate change is man-made or not. As emergency managers, it doesn't make a difference what the cause specifically of climate change is. We have to deal with the effects, whether it's cyclical, whether it's man-made. It's there, right? The data. Talk about data, right? The science, the science is there where it's showing that we are getting hotter, and that is creating stronger tornadoes, stronger hurricanes, drier seasons. Although it's raining out right now, those issues happen, and we're gonna have to just deal with them, right? And you're seeing coastal erosion increasing. If you think about in San Diego County, there's a whole city down there that's on the edge, literally on the edge of a cliff that's starting to fall off, and what do we do with people like that? So these are some issues that as emergency managers that we have to be looking at in the future. James, talk about the future. James comes out and says, a tall task for the show title, but I'd appreciate accurate predictions of emergency management for 2022. Lead time would make our lives easier, right? Man, I want to, James, we're going to put our Nostradamus cap on here, but however, I wouldn't really bank on what we're about to say on our predictions for 2022.
Yeah, what's funny about that? We talk about that quite a bit, and I do think that we as a field need to jump on the ball of artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data. That's a big thing for me because we say this thing, I say it, you probably say it, we all say it, sounds like ice cream, but every disaster is different. And yet when I go to disasters, there's functions that are routine mode versus crisis mode. But even in crisis mode, you fall back on your training. Okay, a flood's going to go into the lowest level area. It's going to wipe out, the flood zones. We know what happens when rivers, when there's riverine flooding. It's not novice, but I think what we have to do is get a lot better at the prediction side, and not only the prediction side, but, standardization of our processes so that we don't feel like we're making it up every time, because the reality is we're not.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of predicting that we could do. Natural disasters is fairly easy. We're going to have wildfires, hurricanes, that kind of stuff. But I think there's also other things like when there's a general election going out and there's a lot of drama around that. I don't care the term, what people are calling it. What happened on January 6th, I mean, this seems so long ago. It was only this year. But that stuff is, okay, could we have prevented police officers being hurt, or could we have prevented people going into the Capitol? I think those are the kind of questions that we need to be answering for sure.
We're actually going to have on Ian Weekly next week on January 6th, on the year anniversary. We were having the team from DC, the city of Washington, DC. It's going to be on here talking about some of that stuff. So if you guys are interested, tune in. Melissa says, hey, something that we could talk about is also his disaster cycle is so much longer than ever before. So burnout is real. Absolutely. That's one of the things too, is I find interesting is we always talked about the idea of pulling, and 2021, 2020 actually really kind of proved this out. We talked about the idea of pulling people in from other regions, from other parts of the county, from other parts of the state, to help us out with disaster response. But with COVID, people were on their own, even with the non-COVID disasters, right? Like some of the fires and tornadoes and hurricanes, because they had to keep people back because they weren't sure what was going to happen in their own jurisdiction. How does EMAC look like now? I mean,
we'll go back to your original question, right? Of predictive analysis of next year. James calling that out for sure. What does that process look like when everybody's involved? I think emergency management, for whatever reason, I've heard emergency managers think that COOP plans are somehow separate from emergency management. And I think we
treat
need
them that way for sure.
Yeah, I think emergency managers need to create coup plans for themselves. Like, what is your cost benefit analysis? If you have burnout, or even worse, your ELC gets taken out by something, right? That happened to the state of Florida during a hurricane because of
9/11.
COVID. That happened to Louisiana on the federal response because of COVID during Hurricane Laura there. And so, like, if you can't operate in house, what is your plan B? I know Rodney Melsick is a really famous planner, and he says there's no such thing as plan B. And I appreciate that. I also think it's okay to say, hey, we need to start having coup plans because we are getting burned out. And again, what is our metrics for response in a pandemic? And are we still in a response of a pandemic, or are we just thinking we are, and really we're already into the recovery mode?
I mean, my take on that is recovery starts the day the disaster occurs. So, that's my take on it. And talk about predictive analytics and data and using big data and using AI. Sean Griffin over at Disaster Tech, their programs over there are fantastic for that, and that's exactly what they focus on, and they're doing some fantastic work. So, I think that's a place to start as well if you're looking at some ideas. He's a very open guy to talk to you too. So if you guys ever have any questions, you can reach out to him. But yeah, I mean, he's that people like that. You also have, oh my gosh, just lost it. One concern. I'm sorry. One concern who's working with insurance companies now with flood zone predictions and stuff like this, and so using the artificial intelligence and data to predict the flood and fire for that matter. One Concern's been doing some great work. Those are two companies I think that are doing some interesting work in the field.
Yeah, if you really want to get to good predictive analysis that's already happening on disasters, is definitely insurance companies. They understand risk better than anybody else because they look at it from the financial side, and they definitely cover their own. So, what was it, 2000, maybe 16? I forget what year it was, but the HAZIS, or the predictive analysis that was going for a hurricane in Louisiana area, like their cost estimates for repair were way off. And so we actually made an official request to a couple different insurance companies to get their algorithm, and they were nice enough to hand it over. And so we were able to recalculate, and it went up by 6 times in one area, and it went down, I think, 2 or 3 times in another area, and it turned out to be much better for trying to figure out what the real damage of a disaster was, just by using their own models that they had created. My question is, One Concern is doing it. Who else from a government side is working with them consistently to make sure that's happening? Are we using outdated data, and therefore, things that seem novice really aren't, right? Like, my question is, and maybe some other people are going to asking the same question, is like, to you, Todd, like, is something a black swan that's truly like we can't figure it out, or is it black swan just because we're naive to it and we should be better at it?
I don't think that, I'm going to go on a limb here, and I don't think we truly have the black swan the way we're using that terminology today. Yeah, there are things that we can't predict, probably, right? I mean, I wouldn't think that if all of a sudden a volcano popped out of the middle of Santiago Peak in Orange County, that would be anybody would figure that out, because there's no evidence of that ever happening, right?
Have you seen the movie Volcano?
But that was LA.
Oh,
yeah.
Black Swan, though, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
right. but my point about that is, like, things like that could have happened. I suppose I'm never going to rule anything out. But I think realistically, the Grey Rhino is probably our better analogy when it comes to emergency management. Because this pandemic, everybody's like, oh, we were so underprepared for it, blah blah blah, this came out of nowhere, no one can ever predict this. No, we've been doing pandemic flu planning for years.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, was it called a COVID plan? No. Was it called the coronavirus plan? No. But I mean, realistically, pandemic is a pandemic, right? And so Ebola, SARS, MERS, MARS, whatever you want to add into it, other
Moon.
infectious
Yeah.
disease.
Yeah.
We've been looking at that and planning for it. So was COVID a black rhino? I mean, sorry, black rhino, a well, maybe it's a new thing. Was
That'd
it
be cool.
a black swan or a gray rhino? I would predict that I would say it's a gray rhino. So James, you might not like black swans. I don't think anybody does. But what we need to be looking at are those gray rhinos, things that people don't want to put money into. Like going back a little bit here. I remember talking to people in higher education and thinking that investing in emergency managers at their schools was not needed, that they could just have somebody come in, write a plan and move on for it, right? Well, this is proven that you need to have somebody with that knowledge thinking forward and thinking at that worst case scenario, if you will, hoping for the best, planning for the worst, right? And so those are those gray swans. There I am, mixed it again. Gosh darn it, James. What? I'm going to blame James for that.
So let me talk about if I can be bold enough to share my opinion on the black swan theory of this pandemic.
Black swan, not the black rhino.
Yeah, black rhino combining. So here it is, right? So President George W. Bush happens to read a book about 1918 flu, the Spanish flu pandemic. So he starts putting this task force 18 months before President Obama gets in there. President Obama is now dealing with Ebola and swine flu. And so as a person who worked at the National Cancer Institute and worked on Ebola, I was put on a task force to help create a pandemic response plan for the United States. And in March of 2020, I sent an email out saying, hey, why isn't the plan being followed, to that same task force? And a bunch of answers came back of like, I don't know. I don't get what's going on. I don't know. So in terms of a black swan, I think a pandemic, I think we've been talking about that forever. I think lots of people have been talking about it, especially emergency managers, because that's like the scary one, right? The other scary one is something with nukes. But in terms of like, could there be a chem bio incident that is a pandemic? Absolutely. I think the black swan is the politicization that, we're not all on the same page here. I definitely didn't think about that. Well, obviously there's a messaging component, but to think like people are dying and that there's mixed messages being sent out from different parties. Both parties are to blame, by the way, in the United States. I'm sure elsewhere. But like the fact that like people are being hurt by something like in real time and like mocking it, whether it's showing up at a city center and saying, oh, you're just being racist, so I'm going to show up to show this isn't a big deal, or saying, oh, I don't think it's a big deal, and mocking it on a platform or a podium rather. I think that was truly surprising for me, and I think maybe for a lot of people. And it is also the reason, going back to politics, is the year of politics, right? Of this is why this response is so long, because we can't get on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's politics is supposed to be for the people, and right now I feel like it's hurting the people. And again, I'm trying not to. I don't necessarily want to be too down that rabbit hole. All right, it's time for predictions. And so, James, please don't write this down and start planning for it, because this is just John and I putting the Nostradamus cap on. All right, 2022. What are going to be the headlines of 3 large disasters that we're going to see come in 2022?
You want me to do the first one, you the second, and we'll kind of go that way? Or
Sure. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Headlines. Should we go fun or should we be serious?
Let's do 3 serious and 3 fun. Let's do serious first.
Yeah, serious
Let's
first. Just for James' planning section.
James, I hope your pencil's sharp.
I think we will see. Again, they'll say something like surprising, and it won't be surprising. I think we will see a major wildfire response in early summer. I think wildfire season is moving up.
I agree with you 100%. That was going to be, excuse me, that was one of the ones I'm really concerned about. This rain that we're having right now in California kind of makes me concerned because that means we're going to have more fuel. I don't think it's going to stay wet enough. I think we're going to dry out earlier, and I think we're going to have fires earlier. And I don't think it's going to be just California. I think we're going to see these fires, obviously, in the western United States is dry, and I think we're going to see lots of fires, and hopefully we can move forward on that one. My big one, I think we're going to see larger hurricanes this year. I think we're going to see some, larger storms that we never would have thought of. More storms and larger storms, I think.
I think the one that we should be concerning for us that could really pop up is I think we're going to see more impacts to the supply line. Supply chain is going to be an even bigger issue than it has been this year, because this kind of stuff is rolling, and like exponential growth, it kind of makes sense that in 2022, even moving closer to the end of 2022, maybe 2023, we're going to see major issues of just people not being able to get not just the things that they want, but now looking at things that they need. And I'm really hoping I'm wrong on that one, but
and the other one I think that we're going to see a lot as well are worldwide in this one. I think we're going to see more water issues. We're already starting to see them come across. And I mean, we had water issues obviously in Michigan. We had water issues in Florida. We have water issues here in California. I think we're going to see more water issues happening. And the drought obviously is in the West again is going to play into that as well.
I got one more serious one. I think as again, going back to politicians, as people start declaring that they're running for president or president again or whatever, we need to think about how the country, again, this is a U.S. perspective, is becoming more and more polarized on their political viewpoints. And I think you could see some violence off of that. Hopefully not widespread violence, but there's already been incidents. And I think it's now a standard thing that we have to prepare for and recognize.
That was a nice cheery one on the.
There's ways to mitigate it, though. Here's some cool things. So, like using technology again, like traditional ideas of again, what's your cost benefit analysis? I'm a real big fan of like tethered drones. Watching a crowd in a peaceful way from high above in the air where nobody's getting hurt is a lot better than having a bunch of first responders on the ground. This is messaging, creating this idea of opposition. Anytime where the good guys look like they're in the opposition of the guys who think they're the good guys, if they're destroying destroying property, they're not. But like if they're doing that, then you're destroying messaging. You're like destroying your goodwill messaging rather. So I think there's ways to mitigate without actually, face-to-face de-escalation.
All right, funny headlines
of disasters. That's kind of a tough one to do. Tommy Lee Jones saves Los Angeles through a volcanic response at the age of 88. I'm going to do a quick plug here, by the way. In 2 weeks, we already recorded it on Movie After Action Review at Movie R on YouTube. We actually went through that movie, so it's a pretty funny look to see how realistic that is. So that would be my first one.
All right. Mine is going to be a little bit. So Cal State Fullerton gets their football team back since 1992 is when we had our last football season. And we get a football team back and we win the national championship, which causes mass riots across football fans across the United States.
Speaking of football, I think we return to normal. That's a flip side of the disaster. Ohio State continues to roll over Michigan we return to normal there. That would be a great headline that I would like to see.
Wow. Yeah. The Ohio State, huh?
The Ohio State. By the way, okay, let's do conspiracy theories that you 100% believe in for a second.
Okay.
One that I believe 100% is Ohio State was looking at the cards and they were like, okay, we're not gonna win the national championship this year. So if we go, we'll get embarrassed. So if we want Jim Harbaugh to stay because he's a terrible football coach, terrible for Michigan, he's lost several years in a row to Ohio State. We should let him win this year. And so Michigan will be forced to put him back on an extension because they're like, oh, good, he's finally figured out how to beat Ohio State. They give him an extension, then we beat him for the next 5 years, and everybody's happy.
Wow, that was just as crazy as my Cal-State Fullerton. All right, everybody. Hey, we're at the hard stop. Hey, first of all, I want to thank everybody for being with us for the last year. It's been amazing. It's just been what a trip, and everybody here making the comments. Thank you so much for spending time with us these mornings when we're talking about emergency management. I look forward to a great 2022. We have some cool stuff in the works. We've changed the Crisis Cafe to the Leaders Cafe, so please go over there, check that out. We're going to be doing some really cool stuff over there. The Readiness Lab is up and running. If you guys can check out the Readiness Lab as well, where John and I are putting together a bunch of different podcasts on one location, and we're making some moves there. And also, just everybody, just have a wonderful, wonderful, prosperous, and happy new year. What's your message, John?
Oh, yeah. I think I would, just to add on to that, yeah, big fan. Like, bad things happen in the world. If anybody should understand that, like, bad things have an end, it should be us in emergency management. I know it's tiring. I know pandemic response is exhausting mentally, emotionally. Dealing with the public can be exhausting. Dealing with politicians can be exhausting. But just realize that you are the good guys or the good girls in the room, and it will have an end. There will be other disasters in the future, and we'll get through those as well. Messaging means everything. So let's put out the message that being positive. Todd, you're on my show tomorrow. So if you want to check out, I have all the messaging in the world for Disaster Tough. So make sure you check out Todd. And yeah, we'll see you in 2022.
All right, everybody. Hey, everybody. Again, it's been a pleasure having you guys here with us. Please stay safe and stay hydrated.